Shut that off, and here we are. Welcome to Two Therapists and a Microphone. I am Dr. Harrison Davis.
And I'm Dr. Aisha Dickerson.
Two Therapists and a Microphone is a show about mental health, relationships, and social issues that personally affect you. We broadcast live every Thursday at 7 p.m. now on the Our Black Media Network.
Harrison and I are two licensed psychotherapists with decades of clinical experience, and we want to hear from you. We want to hear about the situations or dilemmas that you're going through. And you can send us your questions by visiting www.twotherapist.com and click on Ask Two Therapists at the top of the page. We've been getting a few questions, and
We
we're going to
are.
address one tonight, but keep sending them. As long as you send them, we will
Absolutely.
answer
We
your
we we
question.
want to answer your questions, and have two experts plus an additional one, somebody who you can relate to, somebody who understands you, your lifestyle or your situation, and we're going to give you our honest answer. So we're going to answer one of those questions tonight. But to start the show off with, a couple of weeks ago, I'm glad to have Dr. Aisha back. We took a
Glad to be
couple of weeks
back.
off. I think we needed that little break, from the
Mhm.
holiday and take care of a few things. So I'm glad you're back, Aisha. But a few weeks ago, we had a show on narcissistic personality disorder. That's a hot topic. We talked about it. Our expert guest did a wonderful job talking about it. And I remember doing the show, and I think a lot of people responded to that show too.
Mhm.
But I remember thinking, I'm not doubting narcissistic personality disorder, but I mentioned everybody can't have it. Just because someone's a jerk and they're selfish, but there is another personality disorder that I think you need to look out for. I mean, this is the one I believe is more prevalent than narcissistic personality disorder, and that is borderline personality disorder. And every time I say it, I'm gonna say it that way with a little dramatic tone because that fits.
That was very dramatic. You said borderline.
Borderline personality disorder. So we're going to talk about that, have an expert guest. What are your thoughts about this topic today, Aisha?
So I've heard, well, of course, I'm familiar with borderline. What I
Yep.
know is that I don't work with people who have borderline personality disorder. It's one of those
Lucky
things
you.
that I think I think it requires an energy and
Yeah,
expertise that maybe I don't have. I'm good at a lot of things. I'll never know if I'm good at working with people who have borderline personality disorder. But luckily, I know wonderful people I can refer them to, like Winter.
yeah,
And I know that I know that
Thank you.
a lot of people are talking about borderline personality disorder more because of things like TikTok. It's
yeah.
one of those things that kids are trying to diagnose themselves with. Oh, my borderline personality disorder. Oh, my BPD. And so I also know that a lot of people who work with that population use BT, which we'll talk about a
Yeah.
little bit soon, hopefully. But that's also something I'm not trained in. So I know with any personality disorder, it's not something that just goes away. You're gonna have it forever.
Hmm.
And we're going to talk tonight about why this specific disorder is considered somewhat difficult to treat by certain therapists
Yep.
and why it's considered difficult to live with, work with, and love these
Absolutely.
people.
Absolutely. So let me introduce our guest who's an expert with it. You like the borderlines, as I like to call them sometimes. You
I
like to work
do.
with them.
I
So,
do. I love working with BPD.
So Winter Foddrell is a DBT therapist. That's a dialectical behavioral therapist who specializes in working with the LGBTQ community, BIPOC adults, that's Black, Indigenous people of color, that's a new term I learned, and individuals diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. She began her counseling career as an advocate for equality and reproductive justice. Her passion for social justice led her to the sacred space to support others in mental health at her private practice, Revolution Psychotherapy, and to view mental health as a revolutionary act. I like that. Her approach to therapy blends the connection between mental health and social justice issues to support clients in identifying and achieving their life worth living goals in a society that is designed to work against them. Winter received her BA degree in Women's Studies from Virginia Commonwealth University and her master's degree in mental health counseling from Argosy University in Atlanta. She is a licensed professional counselor, national board certified counselor, and she is also a self-proclaimed foodie. Hey, join the club. A wine enthusiast and a beach bum. So,
Yes.
Winter, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here, and I'm, really excited to be here, and I'm really grateful that you guys invited me on here. I'm,
I'm
looking
glad
forward
you're here
to.
too,
Yeah.
talking about this topic. Now, I've diagnosed a few people with
Mhm.
borderline personality disorder. I have never diagnosed anybody with narcissistic personality disorder. But
Yeah,
what
I can't say that I have either.
and like Dr. Aisha, they are challenging. They're challenging as clients, and they're challenging having that person in your life, whether it's a family member, you're in a relationship with them, or just someone you work with. But how did you get involved with working with borderlines? That's what I'm gonna call it right now.
Yeah, so gosh, that's almost like a long-winded answer, but when I was doing my internship, um, I started off at like a community mental health agency, and unfortunately, the site dried up. But my friend and colleague Clarissa Cooper, who's with North Atlanta DBT,
I'm familiar with them.
yeah, I reached out to her and I was like, "Hey, my site dried up. Do you know of anything?" And she was like, "Yeah, come on over to where I work. I'm, doing DBT with clients who have BPD." And I sort of took a chance on the internship there,
Yeah.
and I'm glad that I did because it really did change my life. And I'll say, starting off, I did not know anything about BPD other than what was taught to me in school.
Hmm.
And when I learned about BPD, I remember my professor saying, these are hot mess clients. And I was like, oh
I
my
got that
gosh, it
too.
sounds it sounded terrifying. And I was like, I don't want any parts of it. No parts of it. I don't want no parts of it. Right. And I think the universe kind of just placed me at my internship site, my new site, to really, learn more about BPD and learn more about clients who have BPD, and to really develop an appreciation for it. So I started off as an intern, as a DBT intern, and kind of continued my career after my internship as a DBT therapist on the clinical team. And it was at Skyland Trail. Skyland Trail is a
Hmm.
nonprofit residential facility here in
Yeah.
Atlanta. So that's
Okay.
how I got into it. Like, it kind of stuck with me.
All right, so Winter, why don't you
Yes.
give the people a clear, less clinical definition of borderline personality disorder? What is
Yeah.
it?
So I, that's the age old question, right? Like, what is it?
Hmm.
Um, I have kind of adopted a definition from the National Education Alliance for BPD, which really is about like a disorder of ongoing patterns of difficulty with being able to regulate your emotions, being able to regulate your thoughts or thinking, difficulty with like your self-image and your self-confidence, and ultimately relationship conflict. It is a personality disorder, and I think you were talking earlier, Dr. Dickinson, about like, this is something that people are going to have the rest of their lives. It's not like it's going to go away. And so really I talk to my clients about managing the symptoms of BPD, and kind of like what the symptoms are, ranging from suicide to self-harm to
Hmm.
impulsivity, to, really unstable, unmanageable relationships, and like this sort of poor sense of self and, concept of self, if you will.
Yeah, I can remember talking to, well, I received the same messages that you received from your professors. I got the same thing from
Mhm.
mine, painted this weird mythical
Yeah.
picture of this mythical monster that we should actually stay away from. Sort of, I got a lot of warnings about it, and didn't see a whole lot of it in my internship, and read up about it and learned about it from others, but I described it sometimes to my former students. It's much more of a relational disorder and how these individuals actually relate to other people. They're never. It's like they're never comfortable
Yeah.
in relationships, and that's where a lot of the symptoms flare up. Let me know if I'm wrong about anything because you're the expert. And they sabotage things a
Hmm.
lot, and they're highly manipulative. uh,
Yeah, so my DBT background will move away from judgment, right? So we try not to say that
that's a good
that
thing.
BPD clients are manipulative or that they are, crazy or whatever, because we really try to look at the whole person. And part of what is really important to clients with BPD is the relationship, right? Like connection and being able to foster connection with other people. And so, one of the things that I talk to my clients about is the concept of the biosocial theory, which is a part of DBT and understanding what the diagnosis looks like. And what the biosocial theory says is like, let's look at the connection between, your emotional experience and your behavior and how that shows up in your environment, or what can be known as like nature versus nurture argument. And ultimately, excuse me, when we think about the biosocial theory, we're thinking about like clients who have BPD really struggle with high emotional sensitivity. I talk with my hands, so let me know if it's too
It's
much,
okay.
right?
It's okay. It's fine.
So high emotional sensitivity, which means that the slightest thing can set them off, and they're going to experience emotions much more often than other people would, and their emotions seem to just come out of the blue. The other thing that you add to high emotional sensitivity is high emotional intensity. So not only are they more sensitive to emotions, but they're going to feel them really intensely. They're going to feel them um, like a freight train, and they're going to be long lasting. And then you have high emotional reactivity. So you think about, I'm spending a lot of time with this intense emotion. I'm really sensitive to it. It's only natural that the emotion is going to drive me to act on it. And that's where a lot of impulsive behaviors come from. So, um, you know, self harming or gambling or impulsive sexual behaviors or binge eating comes up a lot. And then when we think about our reactivity, we spend so much time in this high emotional state, it's going to take longer for them to come down to a state of calm or rest, or what's known as like baseline. So when we pair all of those things together with um, their social environment will show up in one of two ways. Either it'll be a validating, supportive environment, or it'll be an invalidating, traumatic environment that not only negates their experiences, but oh, hey, Johnny Jenkins, it's so nice to see
Sorry to
you.
interrupt you. I just want to put that up.
Yeah, no, thank you. But no, their social environment will be really invalidating and traumatic. And not only will it negate their experience, but it'll also punish their own emotional experiences, will reinforce maladaptive coping behaviors, and then oversimplify problem solving. So when we think about like, oh, telling someone you should just stop crying. Well, therapists would never say that to anyone, but someone
Not to their
who
client, they might say
not
it.
right, not to their client, right? But like a loved one telling someone who has BPD stop crying is really invalidating because it's dismissive of
Hmm.
the pain and suffering that they're going through. So that's kind of the approach that I take, and you know, what I discuss with my clients to kind of help them understand like how it shows up in their life, and to really grasp like you're dealing with something that other people aren't dealing with. um, and that's really eye-opening for them.
So what about so I hear all you're telling me about their, I'm going to say, emotional stability, or some would even say lack of.
Yeah,
How does
dysregulation is what we call it.
how does someone live in a relationship, in a loving relationship, with someone who has borderline personality disorder? Because my
That's a
experience has
great
always
question.
been that it comes up when there are issues with relationships, and my thoughts are like, how are you getting all these relationships with how are
Yeah,
you always in these relationships with this issue with emotional regulation?
yeah, it's, you know, it's interesting because that's a part of the diagnosis, is like getting into these unstable relationships. And not only does that show up like in platonic relationships, but it shows up in romantic relationships. It might even show
Work
up in
relationships.
work relationships, yeah, at their jobs. So, you know, if you're in a relationship with someone who has BPD, it can feel a lot like you're walking on eggshells around them. Like you're
Every
worried
day.
about every little thing that you say setting them off. Um, and it's because they are spending so much time in their head and so much time in their what's known as like emotion mind, sorting out what's fact and what's not fact, right? If they're spending a lot of time in emotion mind, which again is that high emotional sensitivity, then they are unable to actually be able to see what's fact-based information. So they start interpreting their
Mhm.
emotions as absolutes, right? Um, Part of what I work on with my clients in individual therapy is really helping them to understand and make sense of like their own thoughts, and in a lot of ways like do a lot of cognitive restructuring. um, and I help them with interpersonal communication, right? So being able to advocate for themselves, being able to communicate when something is uncomfortable for them or painful for them. We work a lot on validation. So being able to like self validate, because clients who have BPD often engage in self invalidation. And similarly, on the back end, I encourage loved ones of clients who have BPD to actually seek their own therapy as well, to like actually engage in some of the DBT skills that we're learning, so that they are, you know, better able to understand exactly what their loved one is going through. I think it is both challenging um, to be in a relationship with someone who has BPD because it's constant work.
Mhm.
Um, and I also think it is doable and possible and still can be a healthy relationship for folks. Um, yeah, it's challenging. And
Mhm.
I think that, you know, just like the client who's doing work with around BPD and doing ultimately DBT, which is what is recommended, I hope that their loved one is doing that as well.
Yeah, because they bring a lot of complications to their
Yeah.
relationships or people they come in contact with. So, Winter, you've painted a very good clinical picture that I believe Aisha and I we understand. We
Yes.
get it, and some of our clinician friends out there. But let's break it down of what it actually looks like to the everyday person, the viewer, our viewers who are trying to learn about this. Give us an example or two of how
Yeah.
someone demonstrated their borderline tendencies and how they actually what they actually did within a relationship,
Yeah.
so we can
So
know what that deregulation what it really looks like.
Yeah, so I mean, it's, it's hard for me to say that because each client is so unique in
Hmm.
what they struggle with. But um, I have, seen clients jump from one relationship to the next, um, like that.
And
Um,
they're in
a-
love,
in love is a strong word. I think
intense emotions.
I'd
Right.
say they're in intense like,
Okay.
um, because
Okay.
their
It's
their
just like I
concept
like that.
their concept of love is ultimately skewed, right? So that's another part of what we work on in therapy too, is identifying what healthy relationships look like. A
So would you
big
agree?
part,
I'm sorry to cut you off. I
yeah, go
remember
for it.
someone said something about they love hard one time. Remember that, Aisha? We saw that on the show. Would you
Yes.
classify?
Yes.
Yeah. Would you classify that as someone with very quick, intense feelings for someone? They love hard. If
It's
not, that's
hard for
okay.
me to say, it is hard for me to say because I think it could be a possibility. I also think that, you know, for a lot of clients with BPD, love is their concept of love is sometimes skewed, right? So sometimes they get in relationships that are could be abusive in nature,
Hmm.
and um, in which they could also develop like infatuation.
Hmm.
They could love someone that is actually not available, and I've
Hmm.
seen a lot of clients
Yep.
get into
Yep.
relationships where there's like extramarital affairs going on. Codependency comes up a lot.
Yep.
And so I could see how, this concept of like loving hard is
Hmm.
directly related to being codependent on someone. So, looking toward another person to define their own self worth and value, and to really guide their life is really um, a big part of what they struggle with as well. So it's
And
hard for me to
describe.
say.
Yeah, I know. So, but describe to us what it looks like when someone is experiencing deregulation. Something has triggered them, and to the rest of us, it may have been a mild issue, but as you mentioned, they have intense emotions, and they're
Yeah.
unable to manage those emotions. Because I think that's what I see most often, in addition to the control that they're trying to have on other individuals. But let's first start talking about the deregulation and what that looks
Yeah.
like.
So I think it's helpful to like look at or talk about like what the types of dysregulation are that we kind of examine in DBT, which is clearly emotional dysregulation. So a lot of clients who have BPD really struggle with intense shame and feeling like they're a bad person, like they have done something so bad that they feel rotten to the core. I've actually heard a client use the phrase, I feel rotten to the core.
Empty.
Yeah, yeah. So shame, sadness, a lot of depression comes up, and anger comes up as well. A lot of clients will outwardly act on their anger, whether that's through, punching things or having road rage. It could be lashing out as a way that anger shows up, but certainly emotional dysregulation is a big part of it. And the emotional dysregulation isn't um, it isn't weeks on end. It's literally hours, day to day. So one minute they could feel, you know, really triggered by shame. The next they could feel really triggered by sadness or anger. So it is really like an up and down kind of roller coaster experience. Um,
Thank you.
Behavioral dysregulation is a big part of it. So behavioral in terms of struggling with thoughts of suicide, having intense suicidal thoughts, so intense that they're acting out on it, meaning they have made attempts or have developed plans to complete suicide. Engaging in self harm, and the biggest self harming behavior that I see presented with BPD is cutting,
Hmm.
and it's all forms of
Yep.
cutting, and I've also seen burning,
But tell the audience, what is cutting? What is that?
So it's also defined as self-mutilation. So cutting meaning using some sort of sharp object to break the skin.
Intentionally.
Intentionally break the skin. And normally when clients engage in cutting, it's because they're experiencing intense pain or experiencing intense numbness and wanting to feel something or wanting to like take away the pain. From a biological standpoint, it makes sense that they do that because they don't understand or know other ways to cope with it. So self-harm is a big one. Substance abuse is a big one. Seeing drinking. Drinking comes up a lot with BPD. Drug use, smoking marijuana also comes up a lot with BPD. And then eating disorder related behaviors. So binging, and purging and restricting are also big behavioral
So
ones.
a lot of self-destructive behavior. They're actually hurting themselves.
Dangerous stuff.
Yeah.
Suicide, self-harm, eating disorders, all the, for lack of better terms, bad stuff. All the bad.
Yeah. So life-threatening behaviors, absolutely. And then, of course, we've talked about like interpersonal dysregulation, which is, again, like looking at the relationships and sort of like the pattern of unstable, unhealthy relationships. And then in some instances, clients experience, well, I'll say in most instances, clients experience what's known as like a fear of abandonment. So they're, again, wanting connection with other people, wanting to really belong, and then get really fearful and really preoccupied when they're in a relationship, even if it's a platonic relationship, that someone is going to leave them. And so when they start to do that, a lot of like behaviors of jealousy come up where, they're trying to do things to keep the person around.
And it'll make the person leave them.
And then ultimately it makes the person leave them. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's like really counterintuitive, right? Or in some instances, I've seen folks go from like what's known as like idealization versus devaluation, where 1 minute the person that they're with is the greatest person in the world. They are the shit.
The God,
right? They place them on a high pedestal, and then the next is devaluation, where they can't stand them, they hate them. So they kind of
vacillate on the bottom of their shoe.
Yeah, scum on the bottom of their shoe.
Like you were just in love a month ago, would do anything for him,
but now you can't stand them, right? And so then also what comes up is like self-dysregulation, where a lot of clients are unsure of who they are. This could come up in terms of like gender identity, sexuality. It comes up in terms of like their values and their goals out of their lives. And one of the main questions that we ask in DBT is like, what is your life worth living goal? Meaning like, what's the ultimate kind of goal that you want to achieve in your life, or what is a goal that you want to achieve in your life that would actually make life worth living, like you committing to stay here on earth and live and breathe.
Wow.
And then finally is cognitive dysregulation. So a lot of folks experience intense anxiety. Sometimes that intense anxiety makes them experience dissociation, where they start checking out, or they have no sort of concept or sense of time. A lot of them experience like depersonalization and derealization, where they're having like these out-of-body experiences. So we do a lot of like grounding techniques to get them back in the here and now and to really focus on the present moment so that they're not off in la la land.
Wow. So this sounds like a lot of complications, and
it is complex. Yeah,
it is, and they're toxic, in relationships, and feeling uncomfortable within a relationship, but they long for it, they want it, but they're the ones who are sabotaging in relationships because they are so uncomfortable with themselves and who they are sometimes, and they cause the problems within their relationships.
So I think so. Toxic is a strong word, I
It
think.
is.
I tend to err
I
on the
meant it.
side of less
It's
judgmental.
probably the word the layperson would use.
Yes.
They might
Yeah.
say, my ex
The
is
layperson
toxic.
would use the word toxic, right? And certainly I think we can get into relationships that are ultimately unhealthy
Yeah.
and ineffective and really harmful. And I think the thing that, I want people to understand about people with BPD is that they're not intentionally showing up in a toxic way,
Yeah.
right? They're not intentionally trying to harm. It's that they really don't know how else to be. They really struggle with how to regulate themselves. And so it takes a lot of coaching and a lot of coaxing, if you will, to um, really show up in a healthy, supportive way, in a healthy, supportive
Yeah.
relationship.
Another example that I used to give my students, you let me know if this is right or not, when talking about borderline personality disorder, in a counseling theories class or a diagnosis class, the DSM class is what we used to call it. Just think about, imagine maybe when you were younger, somebody did something that really hurt your feelings. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was deep. It cut you bad. That means it was someone you cared a lot about. You cared about their thoughts about you. For some of us, we got to think back a long time ago where we allow someone to do that, but we recovered because we tend to be healthy. And I used to tell my students, think about you experiencing that intense level of pain almost on a daily basis
Yeah.
because someone didn't respond the way you wanted them to, or they didn't respond to that text, or they didn't call you back in a timely manner, or you're beginning to wonder about someone's love for you and whether or not they're being genuine, and all of those intense emotions that I believe we've all felt at some
Mm-hmm.
point in
Yeah, I was about to
time.
say, I've known plenty of people who don't have borderline personality disorder who make some rash decisions because you took too long to respond to a text.
Absolutely. But those emotions, that emotional regulation that you were talking about, many of us, we can rationalize it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they were busy, or, I
Mhm.
got something else to do. We rationalize it. Or, oh, they don't want to, be in a relationship with me, or they don't want to hire me or something like that. We can get over it. But that borderline person, the triggers can be much smaller
Yeah.
to tell them that they're insignificant, and,
Yeah.
and and that is a deep cut within them, and I can imagine it is exhausting going through that on a
Right.
daily basis. But would that be an
Yeah.
accurate picture that I just talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard people also say, and maybe this is kind of more clinical, but I've heard people say it's a lot like having a nerve exposed, right?
Mm,
Like a nerve on
that's a
your
good
body
analogy.
exposed to the air. It, it People with BPD are that sensitive. Like
Yeah,
it's that harmful and that painful and that
like
intense. So
somebody just spit on them,
yeah,
and they went into a rage because they didn't like the way the person responded.
yeah. And normally it's because, their thoughts and beliefs are so skewed or so extreme or so black and white or all or nothing that
Yeah.
they're unable to see things differently.
So it makes me wonder if they can actually be happy if they are that sensitive to things.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have some happy clients right now. I mean, if
Good.
if I
Okay,
if
okay,
I
good.
don't have happy clients, then I'm not doing my job. But yeah, I definitely think that people with BPD can definitely have a happy, fulfilling life, and ultimately, that's what the therapy is there for, is to help guide them toward, what a fulfilling life looks like, even when there's painful events in it.
Wonderful. Well, I do want to say that it sounds like you have a great deal of empathy that go beyond even the average
Maybe
therapist.
too much, right?
Like it's not toxic,
You're
it's
so nice.
difficult. They can't help, and I'm like, oh, that's real sweet. But I know that I don't work with people who have borderline personality disorder, and I know that in my personal life, that is a type of relationship that I will avoid at all costs.
Yeah.
And if your feelings can be hurt, and you cut up one time, you're gonna
Go
feel
into a
like you're bleeding
rage.
out, and
Yeah.
not 2 minutes later.
You go straight for the jugular,
Yeah.
right?
So one of the things I'm wondering about are some of the origins of these intense symptoms as we're talking about them, that it can be uncomfortable managing a relationship with somebody who is borderline. As Dr. Aisha just mentioned, they're easily sensitive and reactive. Either they go into a rage because of something you said, or they become incredibly depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And then you hold on to it and you personalize it for days and then
Mm-hmm.
engage in destructive behavior
Oh yeah,
because
they
of it.
stew on it. Yeah.
They stew on it a lot
Mm-hmm.
over something the rest of us consider small, or we can recover from it because we tend to be a little bit healthier. But what are some of the origins of that? Because I've heard some theories about childhood trauma, abandonment, neglect as a child. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think you know, I know research is still being done on what the origins are, and it's hard to like actually pinpoint what causes BPD. But um, what I think is that it is a combination of sort of genetics or being born and emotionally sensitive, and coupled with um, again invalidation. So that could show up as like childhood trauma experiences definitely have an impact on um, how or if one develops BPD. It could look like the slightest bit of invalidation from either parents or just someone with whom um, you feel connected with, that kind of creates that um, invalidation. So I think it's a culmination of things. I don't think it's just one thing or the other. I definitely think that early childhood experiences have definitely influenced and impacted or caused BPD. I also think that, there's a biochemical makeup or something different component, going on that clients with BPD have that's different than other folks.
All right. Well, I don't have any other questions. I
Okay.
want to get out. I mean, you've given me a lot of information, and
A
I
lot
want
of things to
It's
think about.
helpful.
to learn probably more than I learned when I was in my master's program.
Same here.
Borderline
Me
personality.
too, actually.
I want
But
to give Harrison the chance to ask any more questions regarding that before we move on to our
yeah, because we
audience.
got our audience question. But so my
Yeah.
last question about this, and I'm glad you mentioned DBT. The audience can think about it. We gave a lot of examples about um, what it looks like, and we talked about some possible origins with it. But there is a little controversy with it, where there are a lot more women who are
Mm.
diagnosed with borderline personality disorder than men.
Hmm.
And just want to know your thoughts about that. I've encountered some men who have it and argued with a client who I believe her husband was borderline.
Yeah.
He demonstrated all of those symptoms, but she insisted that he was narcissistic. But I'm gonna leave that alone. But
You know,
what about this whole thing, this gender issue that's connected with it?
yeah, so I, definitely have seen some statistics that say, women have been diagnosed more than men. I also think that part of what's happening is that um, BPD is being sort of misdiagnosed as bipolar disorder. I've seen that because there's a lot of overlap
Yeah,
between the
I can
two.
see that.
Yeah. I also think that, the feminist in me is thinking about how women have historically kind of taken on or been believed to take on this role as like a really big empath and like really sensitive. And, you know, in history, we've kind of been portrayed as like these hysterical beings. And I definitely think that that's part of the stigma, is that women have BPD more than men. I definitely think that men have BPD as well. I
You
think
betcha.
there's not enough like studies going on to actually look at the prevalency of BPD in men, because there is, again, so much stigma around having BPD, but then there's so much stigma around men struggling with mental health and appearing like weak or vulnerable, right? And I think that, you know, for some reason, having something like narcissism or bipolar or whatever is an easier pill to swallow than having BPD, right?
Yeah.
Like no one wants to say, "Oh, I have BPD," or no one wants to work with people who have BPD. So there's way more stigma assigned to it.
Well,
It's just my thoughts.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to know. You're the expert. Yeah. You know, Aisha and I, we avoid those clients. You know, I
just am happy to refer. I
Yes.
diagnose, and I want everyone that I work with, even if only for 1 hour, to get the best help they can get. So I always just try to refer to somebody else.
I appreciate that.
So
you know your
in
limits,
my
Dr.
Rolodex,
Dickinson.
Winter. You're in it, because I've had a couple of slip through. You know, they didn't show me until that third session, and I'm still like, oh wow, look at that.
Yeah,
now they're mad at me. They're raging at me because of something I suggested. Gotcha.
Yeah, normally I can tell within like the first or second session, like, you have BPD. This makes sense.
Because they don't know.
I'm about 6 months in before I.
All right. So Winter, thank you for the wonderful information. That was actually very good, and you just did it all off the top of your head. You know, God bless you with that. And so what we want to do now for a few minutes is talk about a question that we got from an audience member.
Oh boy.
Got it last week. Let me just pull it up on my screen. I'm gonna try to read it.
I have it here if you want me to read it for you.
Thank you so much, Aisha.
All right. So our viewer is a 35-year-old female in Decatur, Georgia. And she says, I've been seeing a therapist, he's a Black man, to talk about my issues with dating and self-esteem. He advertises that he can help women be better partners and prepare them for relationships. I don't know a whole lot about him, because I guess you're not supposed to know your therapist's business, but it turns out that we have a lot of mutual friends. When I mentioned in a group of friends that I was working with him to make myself more prepared for love, a couple of people made me aware that he is married to a white woman, and now I feel some type of way. Like that's some Kevin Samuels-ish. Long story short, I don't think I want to work with him anymore. Do I feel like I've made progress? I don't know. I'm still single. But also, I think that being married to a white woman is not something you keep secret if you're telling Black women how to be partners. Basically, it conveys to me that he doesn't value the love of a Black woman, and he's not invested in me. So here are my questions. Number one, should it even matter that he's married to a white woman? Number two, I'm going back to him either way. So what would be the best way to let him know that I don't want to talk with him anymore? I definitely want him to know that his white woman is part of my decision.
Wow. That's an interesting one. And Ashanti, I know that may not be your name, but I am so glad that you asked that question, because you stumped me. I have to let you know that. But I want to give our guest, Winter, an opportunity to think about the question we got from a real audience member who is going through this little dilemma. We do want to help her out.
Yeah. I think it's great that she's going to see a therapist. You know,
same here. I congratulate you.
This is also probably the reason therapists don't give the information out. But what do you think, Winter?
Facts. You know, okay, so I have to notice that there's like some judgment coming up on my end of you know, her reasoning for,
we're all human,
not wanting to continue to see the therapist. And I think it is great that she is going to therapy. I certainly encourage that. I think if she's uncomfortable ultimately, and this doesn't align with her values, then certainly, take the step to say, I don't think this is going to work out for me. I think I'm more concerned that, this therapist that they kind of have like mutual friends.
Yep.
And so for that reason, I'm like, maybe you need to see somebody else. I don't know. If somebody, okay, I just have to name the elephant in the room. Okay.
Do it.
I'm a Black therapist. I'm a Black therapist that serves the BIPOC community, LGBTQ folks. I am also a Black therapist who's married to a white woman. That does not, in my opinion, that doesn't impact my ability to show up for my people, because I'm going to do that 100%. And if someone ultimately doesn't feel comfortable with me because my wife or my partner is white, then it doesn't need to be about me. Like, see who you want to see because they align with your values. So that's my take on it. I don't know.
Gotcha.
Maybe that struck a chord with me where I was like, "Ooh,
that's okay.
that's
You're
some
human.
judgment, right?"
I'm glad you mentioned that because I didn't know it, but you let the audience know how you would react. If somebody had this similar type of situation towards you. So I appreciate you being authentic with that.
And ultimately, again, I want them to do what's best for them. So if they're really uncomfortable with it, then your therapy session isn't going to be effective, and you're not going to get what you need to get from the therapy because you're so focused on the fact that your therapist is married to a white woman.
And I think that it's the last sentence that hit me where she said, I definitely want him to know that it's because of his white woman. It's like, oh, so
why?
Now you're the kind of right. You just want to make sure it's not good enough for you to just move on because you don't like that. You want to make sure you let them know. Stop trying to tell Black women how to be better partners when you aren't even married to, when you don't want a Black woman for your part. Is what I was gathering.
Right.
Yeah. So she has. So the first thing I noticed, perhaps it isn't wise to see a therapist when you move in the same social circles. Just like
that's number one. That's why I don't refer my friends to my friends. I have therapists who are friends, and I have friends. I'm not going to refer them to my therapist.
It gets messy.
It gets really messy, right?
We don't need to know. That's the number one rule for everybody. So perhaps I would have suggested that you talk about that with your therapist when you discovered that your friends know them and you move in the same social circles, with it. That's the first thing there. But I'm also hearing that you have this criteria. Dr. Aisha just brought this up. This criteria for your therapist, when he's trying to help you, you're not married. You're trying to assess yourself to prepare for a healthy relationship. And it sounds like he's in a healthy relationship, but you just don't agree with his chosen mate and who he chose. I don't know what that has to do with him helping you and being genuine, with his desire to help you to reach your goals. So I don't know what made you focus on that, but we can explore some of that resentment that you have and how this may have triggered you because this is a Black man who is married to a white woman. A big part of me is like, who cares? What's the quality of the care that he is providing you? And I'm like, Aisha, I'm not sure why it's so important for you to tell him, I don't want to see you anymore.
That's the point. You just want to be
because your wife is white.
Yeah. That does feel really intentional, right? Like I want you to know that I know this thing about you, right?
Yeah. So it sounds like, I don't know, you want to hurt him. You want to throw that back out at him. I'm hearing some resentment that is there. I encourage you to explore that, and that desire to throw that back at your therapist, and you're using that as a reason not to continue with him. I mean, those are the two things there. You move in the same social circles. We got to make a decision about that. But now that's huge. And then the other piece is you don't like his decisions on who he chose. But it tells the rest of us clinicians we try our best to keep our lives private. I don't have any pictures in my counseling office of me and my family. I don't even mention it. I don't talk about where I live or anything like that. But sometimes in today's digital world, they discover things about you. So that's my take on it. That was a very good letter that we got. I had to think about that for a while.
It was deep that she said it was some Kevin Samuels ish, because that's a lot. Because he just I never listened to one of his tapes ever, and I won't. But my understanding is that it's almost as if he detested in this case Black women, and said that nobody wanted them. They, everybody else was more desirable. And this viewer, it feels like that's the feeling she got from her therapist, because he married a white woman.
Yep. So assess the reason. What's that trigger in you? Yeah. That's what I just encourage you to do.
It's like, who wrote you?
Yeah, go to another. That's a good question. Go to another therapist. Perhaps find a Black female therapist,
and talk about that.
And talk about that. And let's hope she has married someone that you approve. That would be good too. So this is the end of today's show. That was a wonderful question that we got. I encourage the rest of you all to ask your questions. Just go to our website, twotherapist.com, TWO therapist with an S.com. Click on Ask Two Therapists. Dr. Asian I, we are happy to answer your questions. We're going to give you the real, whether you like it or not, and it's always coming from a good place. And so Winter provided us with a lot of good information from a very good and knowledgeable place. So Winter, why don't you tell the audience how can they contact you if they want to continue some type of conversation with you?
Yeah, well, hopefully I didn't throw people off by saying that my wife is white, because, sometimes maybe people are judgmental.
That is not your issue.
It is not my issue, right? But if you want to reach me, please visit my website. It's www.revolution-psychotherapy.com. I'm on social media. It's at Revolution Psychotherapy on Facebook and Instagram. I'm not on TikTok because I don't do video things, but I'd love to hear from you. If you need support, certainly reach out.
All right. Any final thoughts, Aisha, and take us out?
I appreciate Winter telling us so much about borderline personality disorder. I don't feel like I'll need to avoid them in my professional life, but I have to be real. I'm going to still avoid them in my personal life. That does not sound like the type of relationship/friendship, anything.
Co-workers too.
Yeah.
Nothing I want in my circle.
All right. Thank you so much. So you guys have been watching Two Therapists and a Microphone. We're going to broadcast live at 7 p.m. now every Thursday evening. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you guys so much.
like this.